It included Republicans and Democrats. It included the leadership of this nation's labor organizations as well as the leadership of this nation's business organizations. And they stood up at the last minute to a small but determined group. The polite way to describe them is interveners. The street way to describe them is just plain old-fashioned obstructionists. And they stood up at the last minute and sought to hijack the Voting Rights Act with 40-year-old worn-out arguments. And you know, that's a story. But the story that I think is more important to tell on tonight is the way this broad coalition came together. The Business Roundtable and the AFL-CIO, the NAACP and the Urban League. Conservatives, liberals, moderates, Democrats, and Republicans. When you get 98 votes in the U.S. Senate, you've got some kind of coalition for civil rights in America. And my hope is that coalition will stay together to do some other important work that I'll talk about a little bit tonight. So here we are in Atlanta, the big ATL, Hotlanta. We're in this great and wonderful city that is special to the Urban League. It's Atlanta, where the late, great Whitney Young honed his skills as one of this nation's leading social workers prior to becoming president of the National Urban League. It's Atlanta, which is the hometown of Vernon Jordan. It is Atlanta, where the School of Social Work, where Whitney Young once was its leader, now bears his name. It is Atlanta, the city too busy to hate, and also the city that is a pivot place in the history of America, in the history of civil rights. Dr. King, Ralph David Abernathy, Andrew Young, and John Lewis, just to name a few, call this city their home. And this is a city which has pioneered in black electoral advancement. Maynard Jackson, Andy Young, Shirley Franklin, Julian Bond, and I could name so many others, household names who were pioneers from the very soil of this great city. Atlanta is also home to great historically black colleges and universities. Clark, Atlanta University, Morris Brown, Morehouse, and Spelman. Atlanta is also home to a great history of black business, achievement, and involvement. And now on this 97th anniversary of this venerable great organization, we are at this hallowed, revered, and sacred place, Ebenezer Baptist Church, the pulpit of Dr. King. Now I could spend tonight highlighting and outlining the accomplishments of the Urban League movement. We could talk about the Legislative Policy Conference. We could talk about the Urban Youth Empowerment Program that now will provide funding to 27 Urban League affiliates. We could talk about the 5 economic empowerment centers, one here in Atlanta, that are trying to help African American businesses become mainstream businesses, grow their revenues, grow their employees, and build wealth. Or we could talk about the 9 reading information centers in Read and Rise. We could talk long and hard and proudly about our accomplishments. But tonight, I think, is a night to discuss and to define the future of civil rights in America today. Because civil rights, the idea of an expansion of the American dream, an expansion of the American table, is as relevant in 2006 as it was 40 years ago. Now, when we think about civil rights, my thoughts and my heart can't help but turn to the pain that so many experienced in my hometown last summer. The pain of Katrina. For some, it was pictures on a television screen. For me, it was family members and neighbors stranded on roofs in makeshift floating devices, turned over refrigerators. It was the heroes, the young men in public housing that carried children out on their shoulders. It was the business leaders that stepped up while government waffled and sent money and food and water down. The images of my hometown, New Orleans, made poverty real in America again. It made it real. It showed people not in a full-length movie, not in a documentary, not in a cheap soundbite, but the pictures of people suffering. But I want to tell you, those pictures were not just pictures in my hometown. Those people represent people in St. Louis and Dallas. They represent people in Buffalo, in Austin. They represent people right here in Atlanta. They represent people in Gary and Sacramento and Los Angeles and the Bay Area. There are people in poverty all over America today. And while they're mostly people of color, let me say they are not exclusively people of color. 1 of every 10 white Americans lives in poverty in America. 1 of every 4 black Americans lives in poverty. So almost a year later, I do say that I am proud. I am proud in the way in which the Urban League affiliates stepped up to serve 30,000 people, help them connect, put a roof over their head, give them some food, just give them a place where they could find safe harbor in a time of difficulty when they were displaced. All of you stepped up, and you did it because it was in the mission. You didn't do it because you got a grant. You didn't do it because someone called and asked you. You did it because it was in the mission. And let it be said that business leaders like Neville Isdell and Mike Eskew and Andy Taylor and others, they stepped up and they wrote checks and they put the resources of their companies behind trying to find some sanity at a time of insanity. So what is the point? What is the point? The point is that as we stand here today, this issue of economic inequality and poverty must be the new and defining issue of civil rights in the 21st century. It must be. The fight to sit at a lunch counter was an important fight. The fight to be able to afford what's served at the lunch counter is an even more important fight today. And the fight to own the lunch counter is the 21st century. So we must focus anew on income inequality and poverty. We must focus anew on trying to close the wealth gap. I believe that for this generation, This generation of Americans, black, white, brown, yellow, it is